Well, good afternoon, everybody. I think we're going to make a start because it's 3 o'clock now. I'd like to say welcome to this webinar entitled Dealing with Sustainability Claims in Public Procurement. My name is Marcus Nyman. I am Senior Policy Coordinator at ISEAL. And this webinar comes from Working Group 4B of the Sustainable Public Procurement Programme, which falls under the 10-year framework of programs on sustainable consumption and production patterns. A quick overview of the technology functions we have here. You'll see on the right-hand side that we have a question pane. So if you do have questions during the course of the webinar, we'd ask you to type them into there. We are expecting quite a lot of people. We had about 80 or 90 sign-ups, so it's going to be quite difficult to actually unmute everybody, and it can cause confusion with the technology. So if you do have a question or a point to make, there's the question pane in the side, and we can monitor that as we go, and there will be an opportunity for questions and discussion later on. As I said, this webinar comes as part of the Working Group 4B of the SPP programme. Now, this working group aims to look at the role that eco-labels and sustainability standards can play in implementing sustainable public procurement. And as I said, it falls within the 10-year framework of programmes. We're going to go into some more detail of how this all fits together a little bit later on. So if you have any questions on that, hold that for the moment. If you have any technical issues during the webinar, we also have a chat panel on the right-hand side, and you can raise any issues that you may have there, and we can see that. This is part of a regular series of webinars and working group meetings. One of the aims of the working group is to provide a platform through which to exchange understanding of eco-labels and sustainability standards and how they can help implementing SPP. And we help provide a platform for initiatives and programs to raise awareness of what they're doing and how they can be useful. I'm very pleased today to welcome my colleague from ISEAL, Amy Jackson, who's Senior Credibility Manager here. She'll be showcasing some of the work she's been doing around claims and labelling, which has a particular relevance to public procurement. Technically speaking, this claims work is not actually contained within the work plan of this working group. However, as I said, we're using the working group platform to raise some awareness around this work. In terms of the webinar structure, I'll firstly explain some of the objectives of the webinar and introduce some of the context of the 10YFP, and hopefully give an understanding to some of those who are less familiar with one or either of the programs in discussion here, a little bit more context and how this all fits together. So there's a good connection between the Sustainable Public Procurement Programme and the Consumer Information Programme, and this topic of sustainability claims actually crosses between these two programs. So we'll be exploring that in a bit more detail. Then Amy is going to go through some of the aspects of the claims landscape, especially around sustainability, an initiative which she's been working on, the Challenge the Label tool, the Challenge the Label campaign. After that, we're going to have some brief discussion about the application of that specifically to public procurement, what the limitations are, but also where the crossover and where there might be some real relevance and use for public procurement of this particular tool. And we'll have some time for questions and discussion about this tool, and also hopefully about the broader work of the working group moving forwards. So in terms of the objectives, as I said, we have regular working group webinars, both to discuss the work of the working group, but also to provide a platform to explore particular topics in more detail. And this is an opportunity to talk specifically on sustainability claims. At the same time, this will provide an opportunity to understand some of the crossover between the Consumer Information Programme and the Sustainable Public Procurement Programme within the 10YFP, which is the 10-year framework of programs. And it will also give an opportunity, hopefully, time permitting, to discuss some of the next phase of the program, next phase of this working group, where we're hoping to work jointly between these two programs on the question of eco-labels and sustainability standards. We also aim to highlight some of the importance of talking about sustainability claims for both private sector actors, but also public sector actors. That whilst there are particular things about public procurement and public purchasing which make it different to private sector procurement, there is also lots of areas of crossover, and we feel this is a useful tool and useful topic to highlight some of these, and also this will be a chance for us to introduce some of ISEAL's work as well. So before we do get started, what you'll find on the right-hand side, I'm going to launch a poll, which is basically just to get an understanding of who is actually on the webinar today, because we've advertised it in different spaces, and it'll be interesting to see who has joined. And I'm familiar with some, but not everybody. So I'm going to launch this poll. So you'll have 5 options there. What I'd like you to do is tick the box there which says whether you're a public purchaser, a policymaker, some kind of support agency, or a private sector actor, or a sustainability standard or eco-label, just to get an idea of exactly who is on the call here. So we'll give that a few, maybe 20 more seconds to answer that question. Okay, so we've had about 80% of people have already answered that, so I'm going to close that. And actually, it's interesting to see the results there that most are from some kind of support agency, which is obviously quite a broad term, but otherwise a fairly even spread between the different actors there. So that's useful to know, just to see where people are coming from. In terms of the acronyms that we may end up touching on, we'll try and avoid acronyms if possible, because we know that some people have come from different areas, so they may not be familiar. But here are some of the acronyms of the actors and the programs involved. I'm not going to go into detail of each one, but I wanted to put them up there so it's clear, hopefully, what we're talking about as we go. And if anything is unclear, please do use the question pane or the chat pane to ask any questions there. That'll be really useful. Okay, so just one question there. What was the result of the poll? About between 15 and 20% of people fell into the first, second, fourth, and fifth category, and about 38% are support agencies in some form. That was the result of the poll there. And in answer to the other question there, the Consumer Information Programme is one of the programs that falls within the 10-year framework of programs. I'll explain that shortly. So just a quick overview of who we are, ISEAL, because you'll be likely more familiar with some of the other partners and actors involved in the Sustainable Public Procurement Programme. However, ISEAL may be slightly less familiar to you. We are the Global Membership Association for Sustainability Standards. We function to, well, our aim is to strengthen sustainability standards for the benefit of people and the environment. We both help to define good practice and credible practice within sustainability standard systems, and also foster a community of learning to help systems, which includes labels, standards, and certification schemes, to improve their performance and improve their credibility. You may be more familiar with some of our members than with us, particularly when it comes to public procurement. We have for example, Forest Stewardship Council, Fair Trade, Certified, so some which are more familiar than others. So that's who ISEAL is, and Amy will explain a little bit more of our work shortly. Just to step on to the 10-year framework of programs, because I think it's useful to provide a bit of context of where all of this fits together. So the 10-year framework of programs on sustainable consumption and production patterns was actually agreed on as an internationally agreed international agreement from the Rio Plus 20 conference in 2012, and has been rolling out since then. And you'll see from this diagram that, that various different governance structures in place, at the center of which are a series of programs dedicated to key elements of sustainable consumption and production. One such program, as you'll see here, is sustainable public procurement as a specific topic which plays an integral role in improving sustainable consumption and production patterns. And connected with this also is a program dedicated to consumer information. the 10YFP actually has a broad mandate for advancing the SCP agenda internationally, and that has the support of governments as well as industry and civil society organisations. It's also included in the draft of the Sustainable Development Goals, which will be agreed in September. It's included as the delivery mechanism for the goal which deals with sustainable consumption and production. So this is a large, broadly agreed agenda and set of initiatives. Within the Sustainable Public Procurement Programme, what you see here is the programme moving from 2015 onwards. It's been running for 2 years to date, now entering its 3rd year of activities. Some of what you'll see on the screen are actually proposed activities and are not yet active. But as you'll see on the left-hand side here, the work around eco-labels and sustainability standards and the role that they can play in implementing SPP has been running since the beginning of the programme, so that's 2 years or so now. What this does is recognise the fairly unique role that eco-labels and sustainability standards can and do play in public procurement and in implementing sustainable public procurement and sustainable practices through identifying high impact areas, by providing ready-made criteria for including in procurement documents, and because they employ credible systems for verifying compliance with those criteria, they can also be used for compliance purposes within public procurement activities. The working group is convened by ICEAL alongside UNEP, United Nations Environment Programme, and GEN, the Global Eco-Labelling Network, so a broad set of actors actually convening this and managing the working group. And actually one of the key aims and outputs of the working group is to act as a focal point for actors and activities who are interested in eco-labels, sustainability standards, and the implementation of sustainable public procurement. We've developed a network of interested organisations, and importantly is that this provides a platform for not just developing tools but also sharing things which are ongoing, deliberately to avoid duplication of existing activities and try and foster a community of practice between those, particularly between the public procurement community and the sustainability standards and eco-label community. As I said, with this in mind, we're talking about sustainability claims today, and whilst this is not technically part of the work plan for this working group, what we're doing is providing a platform to discuss that a bit further. Now, the Consumer Information Programme is a slightly newer programme within the 10-year framework of programmes and looks broadly at 3 aims: to improve the availability, accessibility and quality of consumer information, to drive change in business and government, and that's from a policy level as well as a practice level, and then also to enhance communication to drive behavioural change. Now, with that in mind and thinking about eco-labels and sustainability standards, there's a clear crossover between those as a tool and each of these 3 pillars of the Consumer Information Programme. And there's work already underway, for example, Activity 3B, identify and scale up effective practices of consumer information, which are already looking at eco-labelling and sustainability standards as an important tool. So hopefully this gives some slightly broader perspective on who we are as the working group and who we are as ICEAL as an organisation, as one convener in that working group, and hopefully this gives a bit of context in where this all fits together. And with that, I'm going to move on to, I'm going to have Amy share her screen, and
okay. I think that's working now.
It is, yeah.
Thanks, Mark. It was really, it's really nice to see how the different programs fit together, and I think you did a really good job of making that clear. So hello everyone, and I'd just like to echo Marcus's thanks for joining us today to hear a little bit about the work that we've been doing on sustainability claims. As he mentioned, I work in the credibility team here at ICEAL, which is where we work to engage with stakeholders to define good practice for the operation of sustainability standards. And I would like to share with you some of the work that we've been doing. So there are different words to describe the claims landscape. Sometimes we use jungle, sometimes we use messy landscape, that sort of thing. And what I'd just like to do is take you through how we've tried to bring a little bit of clarity to that landscape and the tool that we've developed to help other users do that as well. So many of us work, in sustainability, and so we're quite familiar with the different types of sustainability. But taking a step back and looking at it from a general user perspective, they're not necessarily differentiating between the different types of sustainability claims. So these are some examples of claims. They're generic, they're made up, but the examples of some of the types of claims that different users could come across at any point. From ICL's perspective, we recognize that our members are operating within this wider landscape of different kinds of sustainability claims, and set out to try to bring a bit of clarity here. So I'm just conscious I'm saying the term sustainability claims, and I just want to define that from ICL's perspective in terms of the guiding definition that we've been using as we've been developing this work, which is basically any message or image or tool that is used to set apart product or business or service on the basis of one or more of the three pillars of sustainability. So for example here, there's some kind of claim being made about, for example, we've reduced our waste by 75%. There is a promotion trying to get some recognition that this has happened, the waste has been reduced, so that's a claim, we've reduced our waste by 75%. And it's trying to recognize that and setting it apart from other activities, and it's on the basis of sustainability pillar of environment. So we reduce our waste by 75%, and that's related to environment. It's not necessarily talking about social. You could argue it's talking about social, or you could argue it's talking about economic, and that there's probably been some savings. But what we're trying to point out is that sustainability claims could be based on any one of the three pillars, and that's the definition we've used as we've been developing this work. So in looking at these different examples of types of claims, we tried to distill these down to better understand the origin of these claims. So these are what we call types of claims. Some of them, at the top there, you can see the sustainability standards. Those are the nature of the claims that arise from members of ICL, but of course we recognize that these claims are operating in this wider landscape. So here are some of other examples. There's no value judgment. It's recognizing that most users of claims don't think about it in this way, so we're trying to bring a bit of clarity there. So looking at how all of this plays out, and we started to do some research to see if there was a need for ICL to provide guidance in the landscape to help both with the messaging of our members, but also just with the users of all sustainability claims. And through that research, we discovered that yes, there was a strong desire for some help in the space, and we continued with conversations and researching the types of claims that were being made and looking at all of the different guidance tools and documents about claims that were available, and looking just at the claims landscape in general. And one of the things that I found on this is that kind of expected to see that, you know, the claims that we hear complaints about, the way you hear complaints about them is that you expect that they're going to be, you know, quite obviously fraudulent or really misleading, or on the other hand, that you might be able to quite easily identify whether the claim is credible. What we've actually found is that actually most of them it's just really hard to tell whether the claim is credible or not, or based on a credible system or not. That there's this huge percentage of claims that are just vague. It's hard to tell. In that way, they can be potentially misleading, but it's just hard to know whether or not to trust them. So with this lack of clarity, we see that there's an opportunity to basically try and make this orange area a little bit smaller. So move up provide guidance on what is a credible claim, but also help users of claims, and this is the big objective of the challenge the label tool, to understand, to ask questions and understand whether a claim is credible or not. So embarking on this work, in general, you know, as much as we think about it, we recognize that not everyone does think about it this much. So this leads to a general lack of understanding of what claims mean, but also because of that vague nature of the landscape, and most of the claims can make it very hard to understand what most claims, sustainability claims, are talking about. We also know that there's increasingly a drive and a desire to buy sustainably, but that the tools we've heard and seen that the tools aren't necessarily there to help buyers to do that. And in this broader context, at the moment, for claims makers, there's quite a low risk and high reward to making misleading claims. It's in the context of not necessarily having a huge amount of understanding of what sustainability claims are about. It can be hard to, you know, challenge the label, as it were. So what we want to do is to help to make those vague or misleading claims higher risk and low reward, and we want to make sure that buyers are equipped and informed to help reward good claims. So looking at this overall scenario, we sought funding to develop some tools to help to bring some clarity to this space and equip buyers with these tools. The development process was fairly extensive. It was over the last 18 to 24 months. It was guided by a 10-person steering committee, and I'll show you who they are in a moment. And we did 2 official rounds of consultation on the Good Practice Guide, which is another document that we did in parallel. But through all of these rounds of consultation, we were having several conversations. We had workshops and online surveys and so on, and a lot of response from users of sustainability claims, which is basically everyone. So we had quite a good diversity of responses of types of organizations commenting, telling us what they thought was necessary for a credible claim. Here is the steering committee, and you can see that it is made up of a broad representation of types of organizations. So we've got NGO, businesses, a certification body, 2 representatives from government. So we had Alison Kim Bennett from the US EPA and Adam Levis from DEFRA here in the UK, which was great to provide that context and that perspective. We also had standard setters, so 2 of our members and one organization that's a non-member, and then it was great to have Catherine from UL Environment, who is representing the Global Ecolabelling Network Secretariat as well, to provide that other perspective of more of the life cycle standards and the consumers movement as well, with Consumers International. So it's a fantastic group of people. You can our steering committee meetings here in this photo. But you know, each time I talk about this committee, I have to thank them because they were really engaged and just really helped to direct the work and make sure that it was as complete as it could be. So thanks again, steering committee. So we ended up with the 2 tools. I mentioned the Good Practice Guide, and then this tool, which I'll come to at the end, the Good Practice Guide. This tool that I'd like to talk more about today is called Challenge the Label, and it's a web tool that encourages greater questioning of claims and then assessment of claims, and I'm going to take you through that now. Looking at the 2 ways that the 2 steps that you go through in the tool. The first step is to ask the right questions, and this is the challenge the label concept. It's understanding what is behind and workshops and discussions and surveys. We found that the things that made the most difference, you can ask hundreds of questions about a claim, but the things that gave you, to narrow it down and make it manageable, we identified these 4 questions that just helped really with understanding a claim. So I'm going to go into these one by one. So the first question is, what product or service does the claim cover? So what is it actually referring to? Sometimes you'll see a claim on pack, and you would need to ask the question, is it about the packaging? Is it about the product itself? Is it about the end of life, and so on? And so we've divided it up into these options. So when you click the little plus sign, it drops down into these options, and then you can try to understand which of these the claim that you're trying to click on those. An explanation of what that particular option means up, as well as some examples of that type of claim. So in this case, it's a product or a partial product, and then again you can click on these further drop downs to get more of an explanation. So that's the product or service, the first question. So just understanding, okay, there's a claim here, but what bit, or is it the whole product that it's talking about, or is it talking about the service, and so on. Moving on to the second question, this comes back to that first slide about the claims landscape, and this is, what is the type of claim being made? And this is, this is difficult. These types are not mutually exclusive, and it's the same through all of the questions. But what we're trying to do here is just give a bit of guidance and help with navigating this landscape a little bit. So the options that we distilled the different types of claims down to are here, and this is sort of asking on what basis is the claim being made? Has there been a performance threshold met? So the first option here is has a standard been met? Is it a membership claim? Is it are they making a claim about having received an award, etc.? And again, when you choose one of these, then what it means pops up as well. Moving on to the next 2 questions. The third one is very simple, and it's, what sustainability attributes does the claim cover? And this breaks down into social, environmental, and economic. And then if you click each of these, any of these, it explains more about the different types of claims and the different sustainability aspects that are covered under each of those pillars. So this helps to remember that sustainability actually has 3 pillars. Often when we talk about green claims, we assume, or we think it's sort of the same as sustainability, and it often is really just referring to environmental. So this is encouraging a wider consideration of if a buyer, for example, is receiving a claim from a supplier that's saying it's green, it's fine, component, but they not be disclosing some significant social issues in the supply chain. So it's just remembering, actually that's just about one of those pillars, what about the other 2? And sometimes the claim is about more than one, of course. The fourth one looks at how is the claim verified, and again this is highlighting that there are different ways to verify claims. In the first example highlighted here, there's a self-assessed claim, which is further explained as that there are some criteria, and there's been an internal assessment about whether those criteria have been met, and that's different from the last option, which is called claim is not verified, where you might expect it's just been something that has been just added by the marketing department without an actual assessment against criteria. Then there's an interested party, that's sometimes called second party, and then there's also third party, and again there's explanations here. But the idea of this first set of questions, these first 4 questions, are really, it's just about understanding about the claim. It's not about making a judgment call, it's not about making a value judgment about what the claim is or what it's based on, but really just trying to get that understanding. We also heard through the consultation that there was a strong desire to know, for users to be able to easily tell whether they can trust a claim. And of course that's complex. As we've just gone through, there are so many different facets and aspects behind these different claims, but through researching all of the different guides that are out there and through talking to different stakeholders and so on, we've actually distilled down the things that are most important to people when they want to assess the credibility of a claim. And we've identified that there are basically what we're calling 5 universal truths to sustainability claims. 3 of these relate to the claim itself, and again, I'll talk about each of these, but the claim itself should be clear, accurate, and relevant. But what we also see is that claims are the certainly in a standard systems case, if they're using a label, that's how they're experiencing the system. But any claim that's made should be based on a transparent and robust system. And this is highlighting that there are these 2 factors. One is how the claim is presented, and the second piece, this transparent and robust piece, is talking about the system that those claims are based on. So looking at these each in turn, the first universal truth is that the claim is clear. So we saw in my little triangle diagram that actually most claims are not clear. It's hard to understand exactly what they're about. So here this says that the claim should be easily understood and free from misleading details. So the idea of this tool is and this website just scrolls down, so you're scrolling down through each of these panels and able to click on the plus sign to get a further explanation. So, okay, the claim should be clear, how can I tell? And then it explains here how to tell whether the claim is clear, and then it directs the user to additional resources. Clear is a natural follow-on from the first set of questions, because really if you're able to answer the first set of questions, that's a good sign that the claim is clear. But then it also gives, you know, you couldn't necessarily find that from the claim, but can you easily find the information? Moving on to the next universal truth, which is that the claim must be truthful and based on substantiated evidence, so it's accurate. In this case, it directs to some resources, so it explains how to tell and then directs to some resources, like sometimes verifiers of claims will have lists of those verifications available, but it also gives different examples like audit reports or test results and so on that you could use to determine whether the claim is accurate and actually based on evidence. Moving on to the third truth, which is relevant. This is about not distracting you, so not making a claim about something to do with, for example, a product that is fairly insignificant to its overall sustainability footprint, and encouraging the user of the claim to ask what are the big issues with this product or this business that I need to be aware of. It's also probably the hardest one to assess because it's the one that requires that you know a lot about that particular product or business and the challenges associated with it. So we've directed here to some great resources like the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council and the Sustainability Consortium, who have done category guidance on highlighting what are, you know, usual challenges with some of these, some of the different product categories. And then we've also talked about some issue-specific guidance. So, you know, forced labor is a challenge in these commodities, in these countries, and so on. So we've directed to some resources there. And for this and for all of them, this website is meant to be live. If there are new resources available or additional resources that you're aware of, please share them with me, and we'll check the applicability and get them added here. But I suspect this group probably has some additional resources that we could draw from, so that would be great to hear from you. So then moving on to the system truths, we've got transparent, and this is, I mean, fairly straightforward, that this is the information about the system is freely available and easily accessible. So you can find, if it's based on a standard, for example, you can find the content of the standard. And the main resource that's directed to here is Standards Map, which actually has an assessment of the transparency of a standard system. It gives some more guidance about how to tell in general, because obviously not all claims are based on standard systems. But the main the main principle is fairly straightforward. It's transparency. You should be able to find information about it. So it's just encouraging buyers and users of claims to be demanding about that. The final universal truth is that the system that the claim is based on is robust. So this is, for ICL, a significant focus of our work. We define credible practices for sustainability standard systems. And of course, we've got the codes of good practice, which some of you may be familiar with. I'll just show them in a minute. But there are, of course, other ways of assessing the robustness of a system. We also direct people here to the Global Ecolabelling Network website, and also the standards map and related resources and the Ecolabel Index. So the idea is to go through and challenge the claim, challenge the label against those truths to get a better sense of its credibility. If looking at a sustainability standard, this is a snapshot of ICL's main credibility tools. We have a lot of guidance and resources available, but the top image here is of our credibility principles, which are these guiding principles for sustainability standards. And just to highlight the difference again, those universal truths are for all sustainability claims, whereas these credibility principles are just for the overall operation of sustainability standard systems. Then each of the guides below go into more detail of the different processes behind a standard system. So we've got the standard setting code, the assurance code, the impacts code, and I mentioned at the beginning the good practice guide about sustainability claims that we've just released as well, which goes into more detail about what is good practice for standard systems managing claims about their systems. So I'll hand it over to Marcus now.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Amy. So we've had a few questions come in already, and some really good questions as well, but I wanted to just, obviously there's application for the tool in various places, but I wanted just to focus a little bit on the public procurement question, because obviously it's a tool developed for a broad purpose, but in many contexts public procurement has its own particular considerations, particularly the legal context, particularly the policy context to which public procurement might be responding. And I just wondered, particularly where there are existing tools or guidance, what is it about this approach to claims that's unique? How is it unique? What else is out there, and how does it fit into that kind of broader set of tools which might be trying to answer similar or connected questions?
Yeah, good question. Thanks, Marcus. So as I mentioned, we did do quite a lot of background research looking at is there guidance out there available? Is ICL going to be adding anything in this space if we do go ahead with this? And there is, as I mentioned, there are a lot of great resources out there that do give guidance on sustainability claims and good practice in claims. There were two main things, I guess. One is that almost all of the guidance that we found, some of the, for example, DEFRA Green Claims Guide, is guidance for claims makers. So it's saying, if you want to make a sustainability claim, this is what you need to be aware of, and this is good practice for making claims. When we were doing the research, we found that there was, although of course you can turn that around and you can think, okay, well, if this is how to make a claim, I can turn that around and think about what do I want from claims that I'm trying to receive. But we did hear in talking to buyers, and particularly also organizations that were advising, so company buyers is our main target for this tool. But the second layer of users of this are those that are trying to advise those buyers and those that are trying to just use sustainability claims for purchasing decisions in general, which brings us to the public procurement work. But for those that were trying to advise buyers on make a purchasing decision on the basis of the claims that they were receiving, there wasn't a tool for that. So we tried to develop this to help buyers feel more empowered to ask questions about the claims that they were receiving well, certainly I think there's application for thinking about a credibility check for claims makers as well. And to that brings me to the second point, which is we tried to take an international perspective and an international look and develop something that was general but and internationally applicable, but drew on the general messages from all of the regional specific guides. There are a lot of great national guides, and we tried to pull the general truths from those to have something that's more broadly internationally applicable.
Okay, that's really interesting and actually connects quite closely to one other question that I had, but also that came in during the presentation, and that was noting on the steering committee that there wasn't any quote-unquote emerging economy or emerging market representatives there. And the question was really, well, it was supportive. It said that it's a good approach, but how can we improve the incorporation of emerging market stakeholders? And I suppose connected to that is another question of, it's in English at the moment, are there any plans or intentions to put it into other languages?
Yes, and great question about the steering committee representation. We talked about that, and we did try to factor that in as we were appointing the steering committee. One thing that we noted as we were setting up the steering committee was that because we were basing this or trying to make this tool for well, it was for both tools. It was for the good practice guide, so we were looking for those with expertise and a lot of experience in sustainability standards, but also because we were targeting the buyers and the users, the recipients of sustainability claims, which right now are more broadly taken up and used in more developed countries. So we thought it was not ideal, but more understandable to have more developed country representation. We tried very hard on the steering committee itself. We do have international representation there, so we encouraged very much the Consumers International, WWF, and so on to reach out to their international networks to feed into what we were putting into the tool. And we also used our networks in emerging economies, Brazil, India, China, and more broadly global, to get input to the consultation. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but we did have a good representation from those markets in the responses to the development of the tools, which we tried very hard to get through the use of our networks in those countries from the work in those countries. In terms of language, yes, it is just in English right now. We have been very happy to see the response that we've received to this and the interest that we've had in the tool and the response that we've had saying that it is useful. And I think we've had internal discussions about what are the next steps. Should we be thinking about translating this? And I think it's a question that we're going to be exploring in our work in those emerging economies in the coming months.
Okay, great. And actually another question that came through on the question of steering committee representation. The question was related to the steering committee, who is the private sector representative? Maybe I'll ask that one first, and there's another question sort of connected as well. But who was from the private sector?
So we had Tim Faveri, who was with Tim Hortons, which is I can't think of the right word, but it's a fast food US. So he's very involved in the it's a big coffee and donut brand in Canada, and he's very involved in the sourcing of the coffee and was their sustainability director. He's now moved on to another company, but it was really helpful to have that perspective of someone trying to receive all sorts of different claims in the procurement side of things, but also have responsibility for translating those claims into something that are going to consumers that are busy in a rush, price constrained, and really wanting to just understand how to most easily communicate with those consumers. So we had one business, and then we also we also had UL Environment, and the certification body is also a business, but not private sector as you would traditionally define, but we also reached out with lots of interviews, particularly in the initial phases of this, talking to businesses about their needs and encouraging their feedback in the consultation process.
Okay, great. I've got another couple of questions which have come through, but if anybody does have further questions now, you'll find the question pane just on the right-hand side there, so feel free just to type in any questions. I'm sorry we can't unmute people to ask them directly, but we've got over 50 attendees on at the moment, so it can cause some issues with sound, so you don't want to disturb the balance there. So if you do have any more questions, feel free to put them into the question pane on the right-hand side. Amy, one question which came through, and actually it connects to thinking about the level at which it's being the tools being applied, but is it possibly slightly broader in that is there any initiative towards having certified claims registered formally at the international level in order to kind of have a recognized means to see to identify credibility? So I mean, this may happen at the sort of individual scheme level, but do you know of any initiative which is kind of trying to coordinate those claims in one place?
So thinking about whether there's an international register of credible claims or any initiative to do that, not that I have come across. I mean, I think that there are some great initiatives, some of which are referred to from the tool. Oh, and I forgot to say lots of times it's challengethelabel.org. It's here on the screen now. But looking at the resources section from the drop-downs from each of the universal truths, there are directions to ecolabel index, which again is just talking about ecolabels and sustainability standards, and also standardsmap.org, which is a great resource for understanding the credibility. The challenge with something like an international resource or an international register of credible claims is that in some ways credibility is subjective. So it depends on what's important to you and what aspects you would most like to emphasize. That's why these truths are at quite a high level, and it's saying, you know, there's nothing necessarily here about the content or about the level of the claim. It's saying, you know, if it's clear what it's about, then it shouldn't be misleading, and if it's based on a robust system, then it should actually be true, and that can be backed up with accurate evidence. I think the closest we come are assessments of the actual system. So ICL, for example, is a membership organization. There are compliance criteria, so the members have to comply with our codes and be in line with our credibility principles to be able to claim ICL membership. So that's one register. For the lifecycle ecolabels, there's the Global Ecolabelling Network, who also does that sort of a check. There are also various accreditations and registrations of, for example, laboratories or certification bodies that are more scientifically based types of claims. So it's a combination of lots of different factors. But as I am not aware of anyone trying to officially maintain a register of those credible claims.
Okay, thanks. I think that answers the question there. But it's a good question nevertheless, because it does speak to at what level this is sort of intended for. I mean, you mentioned it in passing. One question which has come up is so are there? This launched a couple of weeks ago, but what sort of interest, what sort of uptake from whether it's companies or public sector? How are people thinking that they might use the tool? I know you touched on this already, but perhaps you could give that some more detail.
Yeah, great. I'll talk about that for a minute, and then it would be great, I think, to get your perspective too, Marcus, from a public procurement perspective, ways that you see that it could potentially be used. What's been really interesting is we've had a lot of a really great response to this. We launched it at Sustainable Brands in San Diego in June, and it's one of ICEAL's bigger campaigns that we've done to try to raise awareness more generally. So we've had uptake in the media, we've had even radio interviews and things like that to talk about this. We're hearing from businesses that they really welcome the tool. They welcome the simplicity of it. They welcome the user friendliness of it. And we're also getting, it's been an interesting response in having requests like the last question come in and say, can you make a checklist, or can you do something to help us figure out how to just assess, to more concretely assess the credibility of a claim. So we're trying to figure out how to manage that. We've also had a great, as I mentioned, the sort of second audience, which was those advisors to buyers. So NGOs are often commissioned to help procurement teams understand how to buy sustainably, and they've really welcomed the simple sort of introductory but complete level of mapping to understand actually there are all these pieces that go into making a claim, and here's all the things we need to think about. So there's been a strong response. And I've also had some businesses interested in helping turn it around the other way, to help them think about the claims that they are making, to make sure that it's that the claims that they're making are credible as well. And so yeah, I think it would be good to come back and just, I know you've talked about some other ways that it could be used from public procurement, so it'd be great to come back to you to hear your ideas on that too, Marcus.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, we've just had a couple of questions come in now which connect to that. So a question from a participant from Indonesia is, as a government procurement entity, when should we ask the questions, presumably the questions within the Challenge the Label tool, when we want to procure some goods or services in a sustainable manner, since we're in Indonesia and doesn't have a standard to measure SBP except ecolabel for some products? I'll try and answer the question because I think it's a very relevant one in the context of public procurement, when and how to use this sort of tool. I think the first answer to that is that it will depend somewhat in the context and the particular rules which govern how you can actually do purchasing. I think that's quite important to stress. This is not something which can just answer. Won't give you just a simple one answer that can definitely be applied everywhere. However, as Amy was pointing out before, it can certainly help you to ask the right questions. And the question of when in the kind of procurement process to ask these, I think it's actually, there are various points. It can be both in a kind of formal context of the procurement cycle, or at a kind of policy making level, whether it's government policy or individual organizational policy. And that is when, if you see an increased presence of eco-labels and standards or sustainability claims on the market, it's at that point where you're looking to form some sort of strategy around your sustainable procurement at a policy level, at an organizational level. These are certainly questions that you can begin to ask. You can ask it about individual claims, but they can also be a way to incorporate into your training, where you're training procurers to understand better how to think about sustainability in their procurement. It can be a case if you want to specifically use a label or a standard or a particular product or service. Now, that's going to depend on the legal context in which you're doing your procurement, but at the same time, if there is the room within the procurement rules to specify a particular type of product, then this can help form that policy as well. And then also, when it comes to a question of a product or a service coming onto a procurer's desk, or there's an inquiry directly to procurement officials about whether they want a label or a standard, or they want to have sustainability attributes included, this can help them understand the claims that their suppliers are making or would like to make about their products, and perhaps can also shape what they're asking of their suppliers as well. So it's no simple one answer, and it will depend on firstly the rules of the organisation and the country, and also, as you say, the actual availability of sustainable products. If somebody, for example, the tendency within public procurement is to say or equivalent. Now, or equivalent to a label, standard or other sustainability attribute is a claim in itself, so it can be useful to feed into that understanding of what equivalence is. So hopefully that answers at least some of the question there, but as Amy said, very happy to kind of talk further after the webinar as well. We're pushing for time a little bit. We've got 5 minutes or so left scheduled, but I wanted to get to some of the other questions as well. One of which was do you offer a help desk for those wanting guidance on specific cases? Now, as ISEAL, no, we don't. We don't have a specific help desk, but I know that at least the national level, when it comes to public procurement, at least there are in some countries kind of centralized help desks or resource centers where procurers can get information around whether it be certification schemes or other sustainability claims or criteria. There are those help desks, and I think actually one of the important things is that there is some coherence and communication between those different platforms and the way in which perhaps this sort of tool can actually be used at that level as well. And Amy, from your side on the help desk question, would you have any advice there?
Well, I would say certainly having a look at some of the resources that the Challenge the Label tool directs to could be really helpful. It kind of depends on the context that you're meeting, but yeah, there's a lot of useful guidance referred to there. In terms of just general wanting to understand or question the credibility of a claim, there are generally, and this links to another question about whether we could have national legislation or regulation that covers the penalties for false claims or untrue statements or eco-labels. There are, in most countries, advertising standards bodies that you can raise questions with or try to be aligned with, depending on the perspective that you're coming at it from, or other, of course, consumer protection organizations that can help provide guidance there. We've also got within the within the Good Practice Guide, which is the second tool that I mentioned, we have direction to some of the national legislative documents and guidance on credible sustainability claims, and we're working to build out on ISEAL's website references to some of those claims, just because we've been doing so much work on this and we've pulled together all of this great knowledge and resources that we're going to use that to redirect to some of these national legislations and regulations, so that information is all in one place. We also just generally, and again, it's hard to tell the exact context the questions coming in, but from ISEAL we do offer some training services and things like that. So if you were interested in a more detailed explanation of what is a credible standard system, for example, then please reach out. My email address is there on the screen, and we can see if we can help with that.
Great, thanks, Amy. And to step back slightly, we've got just a couple of minutes left, but I think just to link it back to this question of public procurement and also to the working group here, we had thought we might have a discussion around the kind of the next phases of this working group, which is hopefully going to link consumer information and public procurement and thinking about eco-labels there. What I'm going to do in a minute or so's time is actually run another poll just to ask those participants who are still on the webinar where they would see as their the priority for them in terms of the next phase of this working group, where they would see some value. But in the meantime, I just wanted to say that firstly, thank you so much to Amy for presenting this. I think it's a very interesting tool and whilst we both work at ICIL, I haven't been involved in the actual claims work, so it's interesting to think about through the lens of public procurement for two reasons. One, we often think of governments as just governments and decision makers, but the power of public procurement is both the message it can send to the market and also the absolute size of purchases being made by public sector organisations. So in many ways, public purchases are also market players and need to be thought about within the context of supply chains and not just as government decision makers. This can have significant impact on the market and also the market for sustainability and sustainability claims. At the same time, in many contexts, public sector organisations and public purchases are also claims makers. They're also making claims about the products which they are either supplying to other public sector organisations, or they're internally reporting to their to management or to elected officials or to public sector organisations. And I think what's useful about this approach is it actually provides a kind of a unified language through which public procurers and the private sector can also talk this in the same way, and actually they're engaging quite a fundamental relationship. Before I launch this final poll, which is what the last thing I'll do if you're still with me, we'll make a recording of the webinar available probably via the SCP Clearinghouse, which is the platform of the 10YFP, and if not, I'll find another way to make it available to you if you're not already registered on there. We have an in-person meeting of the working group. It's happened the last 2 years, last year in Beijing in China and the year before in London in the UK. It's in Sao Paulo on the 24th of September, which is happening alongside a week of other events focusing on sustainability standards and eco-labels. And if you want to find out more information about either the work we've already done within the working group, you can contact me or Irina, who is at UNEP, and we can discuss further. So I'm going to just launch this second poll because I'd be interested to hear from the perspective of those who are still on the webinar, what would be useful with this next phase of our working group? What would be the area which you're most interested in working on? So I'll give it a few minutes just now, or I'll give it 30 seconds or so. If those who are still online can choose between these 5 activities, which one would you say would be the most important for your perspective from your organisation? We're talking training, capacity building, addressing questions of legality, opportunities for networking and knowledge sharing, helping to build supply and market uptake, or developing tools and resources. And again, if there is further information or detail that you'd like to discuss with us, we'll be very, very happy to hear from you. I'll leave it for another 30 seconds or so as we're getting a few more answers to the poll in, which will hopefully provide a useful litmus test of where we should focus our activities, at least from your perspective.
And just to jump in and highlight that this is the activities of the working group within the SPP program, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So this is what has been solely confined within the Sustainable Public Procurement Programme. We are looking at expanding that to also include the Consumer Information Programme and have a working group looking at eco-labels and sustainability standards that crosses over the 2 topics and the two programmes, and hopefully find some ways to get some synergy and communication between the 2. So that's where we're thinking of the next phase of the working group, and this will be useful to feed into our thinking there. So I'm going to close that poll, and with that I will also say thank you very much for everybody joining in the webinar today. Hopefully it was useful. Thank you very much to Amy for presenting what's hopefully going to be a useful tool for you and also your colleagues and contacts, and also to everybody who's asked questions. They were really useful actually, and actually raised some thoughts here that hopefully we can take forward into the next phase of this working group. So with that, I will close.
I was just going to say, I'm not sure if everyone can see the results, but it's always just kind of fun to know. So I don't know if you want to run through the results.
Okay, yes. Yeah,
I just don't know if people can see it.
Yeah, I can see it. So training capacity, questions of legality and building supply and market uptake all got about 14%, but most was actually concentrated in developing tools and resources, as well as, and in second place was opportunities for networking and knowledge sharing. So that's useful, and we'll take that into account as we move forward. So with that, I will say thank you everybody for joining, and we'll be in touch with a follow-up email after the webinar. So thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.